Jimmy was a soldier brave and bold. Katie was a maid with hair of gold.
The 1918 election took place just over a month after the end of World War I. Parliament had voted to extend its own life during the war, so this was the first general election for 8 years. And, as would be the case for Churchill after World War II, Lloyd George, the Prime Minister, was at the height of his popularity, having taken over the reins of government at a critical moment just 2 years earlier. But Lloyd George's position was far more precarious than it seemed, as he had become Prime Minister following a split in his own party, the Liberal Party. He therefore only had the support of 126 MPs from his own party, and so he was forced to rely on the Conservative Party and the Labour Party to sustain him in office with a parliamentary majority. At the election, the Liberal Party remained split, with 145 standing as National Liberals and the rest standing as Independent Liberals under the leadership of Herbert Asquith, whom Lloyd George had replaced as Prime Minister during the war. The coalition Lloyd George led going into the election was therefore dominated by Conservative members, with candidates given endorsements, which came to be known as coupons, to run under the national banner. This election is therefore commonly referred to as the coupon election. At the 1918 election, the electorate was almost triple what it had been, with all men over the age of 21 entitled to vote and women over the age of 30 being enfranchised for the first time, subject to her or her husband owning property over the value of £5. The full enfranchisement of women wouldn't be complete until 1928, but this election was also the first election at which women could stand as parliamentary candidates, and 17 did so, including Christabel Pankhurst, who stood for the Women's Party. Only one woman was elected in 1918, Constance Markievicz, but as she was standing for Sinn Fein, she did not take her seat. The election was unusual because Lloyd George and Andrew Bonar Law issued a joint statement to the electorate in place of a manifesto, which set out, in broad terms, what the government wanted to achieve. It was incredibly general, appealing for national unity for the public good in the following terms, quote, "We appeal then to every section of the electorate without distinction of party to support the coalition government in the execution of a policy devised in the interests of no particular class or section, but so far as our light serves us for the furtherance of the general good." Meanwhile, the Labour Party broke away from the coalition to stand as an independent party and stood on a much more radical manifesto which demanded the building of 1 million homes and the nationalisation of public services and land, amongst other things. They summed up their case at the end of their manifesto by calling for social justice and economic freedom, but castigated the government for disenfranchising those who conscientiously objected to the war. Quote, "Labour's programme is comprehensive and constructive. It is designed to build a new world, and to build it by constitutional means. It is a programme of national and international justice, founded on permanent democratic principles. Even in an election as sinister as this, in which a large part of the nation's youth is arbitrarily disenfranchised by the government, Labour confidently appeals to the country to support its programme of social justice and economic freedom." The outcome was a landslide for the national government, but this largely benefited the Conservative Party as they stood in more seats than the National Liberals. This meant that Lloyd George would be in power, but dependent on Conservative MPs to govern. Meanwhile, Asquith's Liberals were left with a rump of only 36 seats. This left the Conservative Party as the largest party in the Commons, and it made Labour the official opposition for the first time in its history. Meanwhile, in Ireland, the 8 years since the last election had seen a dramatic shift in public opinion, away from the Irish Parliamentary Party, who advocated Home Rule, and towards Sinn Fein, who advocated independence. Two major events stand out in explaining this shift. Firstly, the crushing of the Easter Rising in 1916 by the British garnered sympathy for Sinn Fein, and secondly, Sinn Fein got credit for their opposition to the conscription of Irish people into the British Army during the conscription crisis of 1918. The election resulted in 73 Sinn Fein MPs being elected. They refused to take their seats in Parliament and instead set up a revolutionary Irish Parliament, which met on the 21st of January and issued a declaration of independence which would lead to war with Britain, the establishment of an Irish Free State, and then a civil war in Ireland. The coalition government held together until 1922, but Lloyd George's position as Prime Minister depended upon the continued support of Conservative ministers, MPs and the wider party. Things came to a head in October 1922 at a meeting of the Carlton Club, where Conservative MPs voted to end the coalition so that the Conservative Party could stand as an independent party at the next election. This decision helped the Conservative Party to dominate the interwar period and ultimately paved the way for a realignment of British politics, with the Labour Party dislodging the Liberals as the progressive alternative to the Conservatives, a pattern that persists to this day.